Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. Okay, so this ain't mine, but my dad's. The next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patel, and my dad have this old enmity because of a small invisible line between our house and theirs outside in the street, even though any space past the gate or fence is public property. And the Patels were complaining that our trash bags were getting onto their grass. To define that line, my dad built a small tilde-2 foot concrete wall back in 2022, kind of like the Great Wall of China or the Berlin Wall. You get the idea. Fast forward to this past January, Mrs. Patel starts building a new wall directly next to against our dining room wall. The entire side stretches about 60 feet long. Over 9 a.m. breakfast, you can hear guys slapping concrete blocks on the damn thing, and it's pretty terrifying because our wall is decades old. The goddamn house is from the 90s, for crying out loud. So it has a fairly nice chance of breaking and falling. Not to mention that our original kitchen dining room wall is only about 6 feet tall. Mrs. Patel is building a ducking 7-foot wall. Because my dad, Dave, oversaw the reconstruction of our house, he's also an engineer, BTW, he knows the ups and downs and laws of house construction in our area. But just to be sure, he asks my lawyer godmother, Jen, for some legal help, and checks the rules from the Homeowners Association, HOA engineers as well. Turns out, you can't build a wall over 6 feet without a permit, and if you start building over 6 feet, either you've got a hefty fine to pay and get a permit, or it gets knocked down, pay a fine, get a permit, and restart construction. Then, he knocks on the Patel's door and asks about the wall. The guy that comes out is Raj, Mrs. Patel's son, and is pretty chill to talk to. "Hey, Raj, what's going on with that wall you guys are building?" my dad asks casually. "Oh, Mom wanted more privacy in the backyard," Raj shrugs, and then my dad asks, "Is there a permit for building that wall?" Raj didn't say anything, but he scratched his head and said, "I'm not sure, to be honest. I'll ask my mom about it." Mrs. Patel comes out a minute later, arms folded, wondering what the duck is going on, and my dad politely asks, "What's up with the wall?" "Good morning, Mira," my dad says. "I noticed you're building a wall along our property line." Mrs. Patel says it's fine and dandy until my dad asks if they have a permit for the wall. "We don't need one," she says with a dismissive wave. "It's on our property." "Actually," my dad says politely, "you need to get a permit for anything over 6 feet, and that wall is definitely taller than 6 feet. Of course, he said he's willing to wait until they get a permit and that this is just a small warning, and he goes on his merry way. He clarifies he only asked if they had a permit. He didn't say anything about what happens if they didn't get a permit and the HOA engineers found out. "Just trying to save you some trouble down the road," he calls over his shoulder as he walks away. A month passes, and he's back. This time with a recorder in his pocket. He again asks if they have a permit for the wall, and Mrs. Patel immediately snaps at him. Obviously, they don't have a permit yet, lol. "Did you get that permit for the wall, Mira?" my dad asks. "Why don't you mind your own ducking business?" she shouts. "You're just jealous because our wall is nicer than yours." She cusses at him, screaming for him to get out or she'll sue him for invading the house and her privacy. "Get off my property right now, or I swear I'll call the police," she yells, her face turning red. "Well, what can you do but get out if a person starts idioting at you?" Anyway, my dad reconsults Jen the lawyer and the HOA engineers to make sure that all the information he's got is correct. Oh, and Jen told him that swearing or cursing someone can be taken against you in court, hence the recorder. And he goes back to the Patel's house 2 weeks later with Tyler, an HOA engineer. This conversation I heard from inside our house. My dad: "Good afternoon, Mira. I just want to follow up about the permit for the wall. Have you applied for one yet?" Mrs. Patel: "Of course not. We don't need one." As in, legit screaming at the top of her lungs. My dad: "Then you wouldn't mind if Tyler here, the HOA engineer, inspects that wall of yours?" And I was like, "Aw, crap," and me and my mom were giggling inside the house. "Who the hell is this?" Mrs. Patel demanded, looking at Tyler. "I'm from the HOA," Tyler explained calmly. "I just need to take some measurements of the wall." Tyler confirmed that this was a 6-foot wall they were building, and that they didn't have a permit. I guess the Patels thought it was cheaper to knock it down, pay a fine, and have it rebuilt, rather than pay the hefty fine. We could hear the wall getting torn down in March. Or, of course, the HOA engineer said it was the only thing they could do. "You can rebuild it," I heard Tyler tell Mrs. Patel, "but it can't exceed 6 feet without proper permits." "This is ridiculous," Mrs. Patel grumbled. "Dave put you up to this, didn't he?" "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job," Tyler replied. "Oh, the recorder?" He didn't even use it anymore. The stupid reconstruction of the wall was enough music for him. My dad still chuckles every time he looks out the window at their now shorter wall. Sometimes, he told me last week while sipping his coffee, the best revenge is just letting people face the consequences of their own actions. The next one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to get into a property dispute with a neighbor, but here we are. This whole mess started about 3 years ago when I inherited my grandfather's old farm property. It's not huge, maybe 20 acres, but it's beautiful land with rolling fields and a decent chunk of woods in the back. My wife and I had been living in the city, and we jumped at the chance to move out there and fix up the old farmhouse. The property sits on a rural road, and most of it is flat pasture land that we lease out to a local farmer for his cattle. There's a long gravel driveway that runs from the road up to our house, and that's pretty much the only improved part besides the house itself. Behind us is a large parcel that had been vacant for years, just overgrown woods and brush. Everything was peaceful until this guy bought the land behind ours. Let's call him the neighbor. He showed up one day while I was outside working on the fence line and introduced himself. Seemed friendly enough at first. He told me he was planning to build his dream house back in the woods, really secluded and private. I said that sounded great and welcomed him to the area. That's when he dropped the first hint of what was coming. He mentioned that his property was landlocked, meaning it didn't actually touch the main road. The only road access was a narrow dirt track on the far side that was apparently so overgrown and steep it would cost him a fortune to make it usable. Then he looked at my property and said it would be so much easier if he could just cut across my field to reach his building site. I told him I'd have to think about it. My gut said no, but I didn't want to be a difficult neighbor right off the bat. My wife was more direct. She said absolutely not, that it would tear up our field and set a bad precedent. I agreed with her, but before I could tell him my decision, he came back with a proposition. He offered to pay me $200 a month to use a strip of my land for temporary access during construction. He swore it would only be for 6 months, maybe a year tops, and that he'd restore the land when he was done. He even said he'd put it in writing. $200 a month sounded pretty good for land that was just sitting there, and I figured construction vehicles would compact the soil anyway, and the grass would grow back. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We signed a simple agreement that said he could use a 30-foot wide strip along the edge of my field for construction access for up to 1 year, with the understanding that he'd restore it afterward. I didn't hire a lawyer because it seemed straightforward enough, and besides, he seemed like a reasonable guy. That was my first mistake. Construction started, and sure enough, his trucks started rolling across my field. But instead of sticking to the agreed-upon strip along the edge, his contractors were cutting straight across the middle of the pasture. When I confronted him about it, he apologized and said his guys must have misunderstood. He moved them back to the edge, but the damage was already done. There was a massive rut through my field that took months to recover. Then the 6 months came and went. His house wasn't even close to finished. When I asked him about it, he said there had been delays with permits and weather, but not to worry, he'd have it wrapped up soon. I let it slide because I was still getting the monthly payments. But then things got worse. Once his house was finally built and he moved in, I expected him to stop using my land and start using his own access road. Instead, he showed up at my door with a sheepish grin and told me he'd decided not to bother improving his road after all. It was too expensive and too much hassle. He wanted to continue using my field permanently. I told him absolutely not. Our agreement was for temporary construction access only. He'd already gone over the time limit, and I wanted my field back. That's when his demeanor changed completely. He told me that according to his research, he'd been using the route for over a year continuously, and in our state, that meant he'd established an easement by prescription. He claimed he had a legal right to keep using it. I told him that was nonsense, that he'd been using it with my permission, not adversely, which was the whole point of our agreement. He just shrugged and said I could take him to court if I wanted, but it would cost me a fortune in lawyer fees, and he was confident he'd win. I was furious. This guy had completely played me. I consulted with a real estate attorney who confirmed that the neighbor was wrong about the prescriptive easement, but she also warned me that fighting it in court would indeed be expensive and time-consuming. She suggested I might want to just negotiate some kind of permanent easement agreement with proper compensation. But I wasn't about to reward this guy's bad behavior. I went home and read through our original agreement more carefully, looking for any angle I could use. That's when I noticed something interesting. The agreement specified the exact route he could use, a 30-foot strip along the eastern edge of my property. It didn't say anything about him being able to put in a permanent driveway, just that he could use the route for access. Then I had an idea, a brilliantly petty, maliciously compliant idea. I went back to my neighbor with a proposition. I told him that after thinking it over, I was willing to let him continue using the route across my property. He looked relieved and started to thank me, but I held up my hand. There were conditions. First, I explained that since my agreement only covered temporary access during construction, and since he was now insisting he had some kind of right to use my land permanently, I needed to protect my own property rights. I would be installing a gate at both ends of the route across my field. He would be given a key and would be allowed to use the route as much as he needed. He started to object, but I cut him off. I told him that if he refused these reasonable terms, I would immediately install a locked gate without giving him a key and force him to take me to court to establish his supposed easement. I reminded him that our original agreement clearly stated temporary access only, and that I had documentation of every payment, every conversation, and every time he'd violated the terms. I also mentioned that my lawyer was very interested in his prescriptive easement theory and thought it would make an excellent case study. He backed down pretty quickly. He didn't like the gate idea, but he agreed, probably figuring it was better than being completely locked out while fighting a legal battle he might not win. So I had gates installed. Big, heavy farm gates at both ends of the route, with serious locks. I gave him exactly one key for each gate. The gates were positioned so that you had to get out of your vehicle, unlock them, drive through, then get out again to close and lock them behind you. It was inconvenient, but it was perfectly reasonable for a property owner to gate their own land. But here's where the malicious compliance really kicked in. Remember how I mentioned that I leased my pasture to a local farmer for his cattle? Well, I'd temporarily moved the cattle to a different section during the construction. Now that the construction was over, I moved them back to their original pasture, which included the area around the neighbor's route. My lease with the farmer specifically required him to keep the gates closed at all times to prevent the cattle from wandering. So every single time my neighbor wanted to use his precious shortcut, he had to stop, get out of his car, unlock the gate, get back in his car, drive through, get out again, close the gate, lock it, and then repeat the whole process at the other end. And if he ever forgot to close and lock a gate and my cattle got out, he would be liable for any damages. The neighbor complained immediately. He said it was too much hassle, that the gates were unreasonable, that I was doing this just to spite him. I smiled and reminded him that he was the one who insisted on using my private property for access. I was simply protecting my livestock and my property rights, which any reasonable farmer would do. If he didn't like the arrangement, he was welcome to improve his own access road on his own property. He tried a few times to leave the gates open or unlocked, but I made sure to document every instance. I also made it clear that if my cattle got out because of his negligence, I'd be sending him the bill for any damages or lost animals. After one of my cows wandered onto the main road because he left a gate open, and I sent him a stern letter from my lawyer outlining his liability, he started being more careful. But the inconvenience was eating at him. What should have been a quick 2-minute drive from the main road to his house was now a 15-minute ordeal of getting in and out of his vehicle 4 times to deal with the gates. In winter, when it was cold and snowy, it was even worse. And my farmer wasn't gentle with the fields either. The cattle churned up the ground pretty good, especially when it was wet, so the route wasn't exactly smooth driving anymore. After about 3 months of this, the neighbor came to my door again. This time he was much more humble. He asked if we could work out a different arrangement. Maybe he could pay me to keep the cattle out of that section, or he could pave the route so it wouldn't get muddy. I told him I wasn't interested in paving over my pasture, and moving the cattle would hurt my lease income. But I did have another option for him. He could purchase the strip of land outright. I'd had it surveyed and appraised, and given its value as road frontage and access, I'd sell it to him for fair market value, which came out to about $40,000 for the 30-foot by quarter-mile strip. His jaw dropped. He said that was highway robbery, that the land wasn't worth nearly that much. I shrugged and said he was welcome to keep using it under the current arrangement, or he could develop his own access road. Those were his options. He tried to negotiate, but I stood firm. Finally, after another month of dealing with the gates and the muddy cattle-torn route, he came back and agreed to buy the land. We went through the proper legal channels this time, with surveyors and title companies and lawyers on both sides. He paid the $40,000, and I signed over the deed to the strip. But here's the final twist. Once he owned that strip of land, it was his responsibility to maintain it and fence it. He had to install his own fencing to keep my cattle off his new driveway. He had to grade it and gravel it so it was actually drivable, and he had to pay property taxes on it every year. All in all, by the time he finished improving it and setting it up properly, he'd probably spent close to $60,000 to get the access route he'd thought he could just steal from me. Meanwhile, I took the $40,000 from the land sale and paid off a big chunk of our mortgage. My lawyer bills were less than $5,000 total, so I came out way ahead, and the farmer was happy because he got a better fence line and didn't have to worry about some random guy leaving gates open anymore. The best part? The route the neighbor ended up buying and improving runs right past my front porch. Every single day, I get to watch him drive past on the road access that cost him $60,000, knowing he could have just spent that money improving his own access road in the first place and avoided this whole mess. He doesn't wave anymore when he drives by, and I couldn't be happier about it. The lesson here is simple. Don't try to take advantage of someone's goodwill, and definitely don't threaten legal action when you're in the wrong. Because sometimes, malicious compliance is perfectly legal, and it costs a lot more than just being a decent neighbor would have. The next one is a petty revenge story. This happened to me a few years ago, actually, but I just remembered it. This was around 2015 summer. I had gone to the grocery store to buy a few things as usual. Everything was going well until I heard some lady yell at me as I'm walking into the store. "Is this your car? Can you ducking move it? Why the duck would you park here?" I was in disbelief. The parking lot is pretty small, and this is in a downtownish area. It's small, but big enough for people to navigate. It's hard to explain, but I was parked in a spot horizontal to the store. She was parked straight in a regular spot. You can easily get out if you make a 3-point turn. I don't know why they designed it that way, but whatever. I thought about it for a second, then said, "You just can't drive." I'd have moved it if she had asked nicely, to be honest. I understand that some people are terrible drivers, but this lady didn't even try to get out. She was driving a medium-sized SUV, RAV4, and my car is a... She just decided that she wasn't going to try and yell at me instead. I walked in and did my shopping. 15 minutes later, I'm checking out, and she comes inside and starts yelling at me again. I'm dumbfounded because she's still here and hasn't even made an attention to move. She called me an a-hole, idiot, selfish, etc. I just stared, then sarcastically waved by as she left. She was pissed. As I'm walking out, I'm like, you know what? Duck this. This lady is a huge idiot, and I wanted to waste her time as much as possible. There was a McDonald's next door. I'd wanted to poo all day, and I finally did. I spent a bit of time on Reddit while on the toilet, then ordered an ice cream cone after. It was probably 25 minutes in total. I'm walking back to the car, and she's still here. I wish I was joking. She could have easily backed out with a little effort, but she didn't try and thinks I'm in the wrong. She's so entitled that she waited almost 1 hour for me to move. She was recording me as I was walking back to my car. I just smiled and told her to have a good day, then drove off. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work as a support manager for a company that sells credit card readers and other services for processing money. Our story starts with a phone call that one of our newest staff members received. The caller does not introduce themselves and instead loudly demands to speak to no less than the CEO of the company and will not give any information aside from his repeated demands and some indirect swearing. Normally, this would earn them a terminated call, but I want to know who has the balls to scream at my staff, so I have him transferred over. Having had some of these calls before, I introduce myself with a very fancy title and ensure the caller that whatever his support needs are, I can handle them without any issue. The CEO is busy at the moment, and I am next in line in the support organization. This is not entirely true, but it works to calm people down and get them to tell me what is actually wrong. The caller is named Steve. Not just any Steve, mind you, but Steve, the owner of Steve's Cafe. And not just one Steve's Cafe, mind you, but the owner of all 7 Steve's Cafes. Steve is offended that he was given to me and not the CEO like he demanded. He is the owner you see, and needs to talk to my owner, not me. I don't own 7 cafes, and I certainly don't own my company. So I can't understand Steve's needs and can't make the hard choices he needs made. I again assure him that I do have the position and authority to do anything he requires. I am the manager of the support department. I can make any changes he requires. I can set up new accounts or order new devices. Anything. He only needs to tell me his problems and I will provide solutions. I will support him. The words are immediate and aggressive. Can you cancel my accounts? Well, yes, I can. I inform him that we need a written request to cancel. I also try to inquire why he needs to cancel his accounts. This is standard procedure. If he wants to close his account, then we close his account, but any feedback is useful. Is he leaving because our product was bad? Because our service was bad? Because he found a better deal? But before I can get more than a few words out, he shouts again, "Have call me. He has my number." And he disconnects. I report this up the chain. No email means no cancellation. But still, bosses need to know. First thing next morning, I get invited to an emergency meeting by the CEO, as well as a few other pertinent admins. We go over what happened, then I am shown an email. Steve managed to find the CEO's internal email address and sent him an email complaining about one of his 7 stores having a horrible time with the product. He is demanding no less than the cancellation of all his accounts and a refund for 3 months of payments he has made for each, as the product is totally unusable. I checked the logs. The problem location does indeed have a problem. That started yesterday morning. They are not down, but they are having a bad time. There are no emails or calls informing us, just the screaming cancellation request. I send over the call logs and we listen to Steve scream and curse at the support agent before he got sent to me. And then I hear 2 words that cue the malicious compliance. Cancel them. The meeting goes quiet. The CEO has spoken. We cancel all 7 accounts and shut down services. They start their day with devices that do not work. The calls come in. Again, the CEO speaks. That account is canceled. Follow procedure. So each manager calls me frantically explaining that nothing is working. The staff apologetically tell them that their account was canceled per their owner's email. We can no longer provide support. Shortly thereafter, the owner calls in, once again screaming to turn them back on. Uncancel them this instant, get the devices working, he is losing money. I check with the CEO, and after receiving a nod, I say, per your request made over the phone yesterday and your email this morning, your accounts have been canceled. Steve just gets madder and says he didn't mean to actually cancel them. He just wanted to let us know what would happen if we didn't fix his issue. He continues to yell. I let the CEO know, and at his request, I transfer Steve to his office phone. I wish there was a satisfying ending to this story, but Steve and our boss talked. Steve was informed that his behavior was unacceptable. Steve admitted that he was expecting expedited service and possibly a discount when he threatened to cancel. He didn't really want to cancel his accounts. He just wanted support to take him seriously and transfer him up the chain so he could get faster, better service. There was no real apology, though both I and the initial support agent were told that Steve would behave himself from now on and to report if he didn't. Services were resumed and all 7 locations were opened a bit late. The one location that did have issues yesterday got on the phone with a support agent and were sorted out in a reasonable amount of time. All is right in heaven and earth. But I do hope Steve learned that threatening to cancel your account sometimes leads to you canceling your account, and not to a discount. The next one is an entitled People Story. So a few years ago, I briefly worked in a screen printing factory. It was located in a business plaza next to a bunch of other factories and whatnot, so the parking lot was shared by all the businesses. It was a decently sized parking lot. Even when it was full, there were still plenty of spaces. So anyway, at the time I was driving my mom's old car. Wasn't the worst, but wasn't the best either. Just something to get to and from. One day, during our lunch break, I tried to start my car and it was dead. I was irritated, but it didn't really affect anything. One of my coworkers lived near me, so he was able to give me a lift home. I didn't have anywhere else to be besides there and home, so I wasn't worried about being without a car for a day or 2. I talked to my boss about leaving it there overnight till I could figure out a time to get it towed, and he had no problem with it. The next morning, my boss walks up to me and jokes that my car trouble is causing drama. Turns out my car was parked in the spot that one of the employees at one of the neighboring businesses liked to park at. In his exact words, it was the guy's favorite spot. Don't ask me why. I've spent many sleepless nights wondering how or why someone could have a favorite parking spot. I've heard of people who grow romantic attachments to buildings and vehicles, but never a parking spot. I felt bad about it because I like to respect people's feelings, but my boss told me not to worry about it, so I didn't. The guy worked at one of the businesses my boss didn't like, so he honestly found it all sort of funny. His main concern was not having to put up with the dude, so he just wanted me to get it taken care of before he whined anymore. It's also worth mentioning that this spot had no signs. It wasn't marked as reserved, had no names labeled on it, or a handicapped spot. It wasn't even under a tree or anywhere near one of the building entrances, literally just a parking spot. There was nothing beneficial about parking your car there, besides parking your ducking car there. Then it comes time to go home. We all clock out and people are crowded around the windows. There's about 3 or 4 cop cars outside and one guy frantically talking to one of the officers. We're here thinking someone got hurt or robbed, something terrible enough for a bunch of cops to show up and block all our cars in. The bystander effect was in full effect. But nope. Parking spot dude was so upset about not being able to park his car in his beloved spot for one day, barely 12 hours, that he called the police and reported my vehicle as suspicious and was trying to have it impounded. It's not every day where I feel bad for police officers, but man, the cop that he was whining to looked beyond over his crap. He looked like an extremely annoyed father dealing with an unruly toddler, which was even funnier because he looked about half the parking spot guy's age. So I walk up and the dude immediately points at me and goes, "That's him, that's his car." Acting like I was America's Most Wanted. And I'm gonna be honest, I got a little nervous. I have priors, cops don't entirely like me. I don't entirely like having to talk to cops, and now some man Karen is pointing me out to a group of officers. But the cop casually walks up to me and just asks me the standard questions. I show him my license proving the car was mine and it's legit and all that, and I explain how the battery's dead and was just waiting for a good time to have it towed. He was chill as hell with me, honestly. Well, parking spot dude was not pleased with the cop's chillness. In fact, he was quite offended. He's hovering around trying to listen in on our conversation. I don't know exactly what he was hoping would happen, but he slowly realized that it was going the exact opposite of his wishes. He butts in going, "Aren't you going to give him a ticket? Can't he be arrested for this?" Just desperately trying to take control of the situation and find some way to make my life miserable, and the cop just sighs and goes, "Sir, it's not illegal to have a dead battery," and was about to give a lecture on what's illegal before parking spot dude just goes full-blown Karen mode, stamping his feet, screeching about police being corrupt bastards. You know, the usual grief from someone not having their way. We all just stand there watching this grown man throw a temper tantrum, and he finally realizes that nobody cares about him and his precious parking spot, so he just storms off back into the building. I'm sure all his co-workers got to hear all about it. The cops eventually leave. They don't even write down my info or anything. It was obvious from the get-go that they didn't give a crap about me and my car. They pulled up expecting a big bust, and all they got was a kid with car trouble and a toddler trapped in an old man's body. I was kind of disappointed they didn't arrest him or give him a fine, but you can't have everything. As relieved as I was super embarrassed to have all that happen in front of everyone, but they were all just blown away by how the dude was acting. I was hoping to have my car dealt with that day since it was close to the weekend, but out of spite, I kept it there another day or two. I later found out the dude ended up losing his job over the whole ordeal, between getting the police involved and, presumably, making it everyone's problem. I could only imagine how done they all were with him. He seemed like a joy to be around. My boss thought it was the funniest crap ever and never lived it down. He loved a joke about getting me arrested for coming in late because of course he did. Bosses have the same sense of humor as dads. I eventually left that job for bigger and better things and got a new car that doesn't spontaneously crap out on me, but man. I'll never forget about parking spot dude and the massive injustice he suffered because of me. I'm sure he's doing well, if even still alive. Anyway, thank you for watching.